Okay, very briefly, some very interesting things you could say about some very interesting quotations in Of Mice and Men in advance of the exam on Wednesday. Okay, the limb is worn smooth by men who have sat on it. And for context, here's an extract from a quotation from Steinbeck's collection of essays, The Harvest Gypsies. There are at least 150,000 homeless migrants wandering up and down the state. And he's talking about California. And I guess Steinbeck is using this imagery to show us the extent of the turnover of people as they camp here, like George and Lenny, and then move on somewhere else up and further down the state, in search of work, in search of a better livelihood. And interestingly here, you could talk about the literary context, I guess the context of the novel itself, in that Steinbeck originally called it Something That Happened. And maybe this, and you can have a think about this, but maybe it shows the insignificance of these lives. They're part of a mass of people all contending for land and money and work. So really, George and Lenny's life is just a kind of a blip, something in a sort of one star among millions, and nothing really noteworthy. Except there is something noteworthy about it, and Steinbeck wants to show us that. But their lives as a whole, or how they're viewed in terms of the society at the time in 1930s America, is that they're just sort of one of a mass of people who are all struggling. Secondly, I could get along so easy and so nice if I didn't have you on my tail. This is George lamenting the fact that he has to look after Lenny, except there's a sort of irony there, isn't there? Because we know that George does really value Lenny's companionship and friendship. And the third bullet point down there, let's start with that actually. There seems to be, running through the whole novel, a kind of tension between the practical and the emotional, between the rational and the passionate. And we see that, don't we, in Carlson and Candy. So Carlson wanting to kill the dog because it stinks and it's not productive or pragmatic to keep it alive. And Candy wants to keep hold of the dog because it offers him support and intimacy, and they've got a history there of companionship. They go way back, don't they? It was the best damn sheepdog. And this is sort of recurring through the whole of the novel. And I wonder if you could comment in an essay maybe on Slim being the kind of the perfect balance between those two things. Sometimes I call him the empathetic fatalist, or the compassionate realist, because he goes along with the killing of Candy's dog. He recognises that that's important, and he even says that he thinks that he wished someone would shoot him when he gets old. But he also recognises the value of friendship and companionship, because he sees George at that moment when he's killed Lenny, and he provides him with support, and they walk off together, don't they? So there's a sense in which Slim's a realist. He understands the ways of the world, but he is compassionate and understands people as well. It's interesting as well that George describes it as if I didn't have you on my tail. And there's this sense in the novel, whenever George and Lenny are described, that Steinbeck uses that preposition behind, where Lenny comes behind George, describe the order of their entrance into a place, when they arrive at the ranch, when they arrive at the brush at the beginning of the novel. And also with Candy and his dog. And so there's a sort of reflection there, a mirroring of the way that Candy and his dog are described, and George and Lenny. And so maybe Candy's dog is to serve as some sort of foreshadowing or symbolism of Lenny's fate at the end of the novel. But it also shows a sense of dependency, doesn't it, and following somebody. So there's the leader and there's the follower. And often the father or the parent is the leader and the child is the follower. And I guess that's similar to George and Lenny's dynamic, isn't it, with George being a paternal figure. There's also a strange reversal at the end of the novel when George looks at the back of Lenny's head because he shoots him, doesn't it? I've put a question mark there because it's worth kind of considering why those roles have sort of, why they're now the other way round from each other. And I guess that's the kind of biggest marker that something then is about to happen, isn't it? Because it is the leader's responsibility to guide and take you somewhere. And now that George is behind Lenny, well, there's a sense in which this has come to its close. Thirdly, then, used to dress up. Now, this is absolutely fascinating and something, if you put in an essay, not many people are going to talk about it, unless this video goes viral and I get 1 million views over the next couple of days. Used to dress up Sundays even when he wasn't going no place, put on a necktie even, and then set in the bunkhouse. Now this is Candy talking about Whitey, the old blacksmith, who he has to explain to George what Whitey was like, because George finds this yellow can of like lice repellent or something, bedbug repellent, and Candy then explains what Whitey was like. Now, I've never focused on this before, but reading today, it's quite a tragic image, isn't it, of someone who hopes to be somewhere and be important and be invited somewhere or part of something or doing something sort of civilized, I guess, and yet he's not. And so he just sort of sits there in the bunkhouse with his Sunday clothes on and a tie and probably a jacket. And maybe this is symbolic, a good sort of overall, maybe for a conclusion or something, quite symbolic of every dream that's in the novel, isn't it? Where they sort of imagine themselves in the future, they imagine themselves somewhere better, but actually the reality is they're not going anywhere. And I mean, that's like George and Lenny and Candy, when their minds were popped into the future when this magical thing might come about. And yet they are in the present, and there is a sense in which this isn't going to happen. One of my favourite quotes, I haven't put it down here, but one of my favourite quotes to use in an essay would be the just two words, "he knew," to describe Candy when he asks her, "George, we can still do it, can't we, George, can't we? We can still get the dream," when they find Curly's wife dead in the barn. And those two words, "he knew," you can't get much more simplistic than that, but it's really driving home the point, isn't it, that there's a sort of realistic disappointment, an inevitability about their failure and the dream's failure. Finally, then on this page, and then we're going to look at a little bit of a bigger section on the next page. If we can just get just a few dollars in the poke, we'll shove off and go up the American River and pan gold. We can make maybe a couple of dollars a day there, and we might hit a pocket. Now, California, the Golden State, or as Woody Guthrie put it, a Garden of Eden. And listen to Woody Guthrie songs. I can't emphasize that enough, because you could quote one or talk about the sort of relationship between Woody Guthrie and John Steinbeck, in that they talk about similar themes. I think they were actually friends. Woody Guthrie's obviously singing about the issues to do with the Dust Bowl and migration and the Great Depression. Steinbeck's obviously writing about it. And there's lots of parallels between his lyrics and Steinbeck's novels. But Garden of Eden, Golden State, California, viewed as a sort of paradise. But notice how futile George's hope is. Look at the modal verbs. We might hit a pocket. There's a sort of, oh, well, if we go there, maybe things will be better for us. But we know, don't we, that that's just a sort of a whim, a sort of futile dream that's not actually based in reality. It's just because people have sort of rumoured it. And actually, remember, back at the top of the slide, 150,000 homeless migrants. They don't stand a chance, Jordan and Lenny. They think, oh, maybe we'll get lucky, but they won't. Okay, we'll just read this little section here. This is the moment that Curly's sort of a pause, I guess, where the characters have left, and Steinbeck focuses our attention on the setting in the barn when Curly's wife is dead. It was very quiet in the barn, and the quiet of the afternoon was on the ranch. Even the clang of the pitched shoes, even the voices of the men in the game seemed to grow more quiet. The air in the barn was dusky in advance of the outside day. A pigeon flew in through the open hay door and circled and flew out again. Around the last stall came a shepherd bitch, lean and long, with heavy hanging dugs. Halfway to the packing box where the puppies were, she caught the dead scent of Curly's wife, and the hair arose along her spine. She whimpered and cringed to the packing box and jumped in among the puppies. Well, it's just stunning, isn't it, how Steinbeck shows the sort of cyclical nature of life here. Okay, so you've got in and out. You've got the quiet within and without, and you've got the air on the inside and then the outside as well. And so you've got this sense of things kind of going round and round. And the bird comes in, the pigeon comes in and circles and then flies out again. And so that verb circled kind of drives the point home, doesn't it? And this is life, isn't it? And I wonder if Steinbeck, it's almost biblical in how Steinbeck describes life, okay? There's a book in the Bible called Ecclesiastes, and Ecclesiastes 1:5 says, chapter 1, verse 5 says, "The sun also rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it arose." There's a sense in which life goes round and round. There's a kind of meaninglessness there. We're born, we die, we arrive, we leave. The sun comes up, the sun goes down. And that is the nature of the book, isn't it? It begins in the place that it ends. And they've got no further in terms of their dream. Now, this is fascinating as well. Why does Steinbeck bother to describe the mother dog's udders that are full of milk, their breasts that are full of milk, the heavy hanging dugs? What's the point? And I wonder if it's because the pup that Lenny has killed, it can't feed anymore. It's dead. So there's a wrongness here, isn't there? There's this sense in which something can provide hope and life and nurturing and protection, and yet it's unfulfilled. There's a lost potential. There are days that will not be lived by this dog. But then it's not actually the dead pup that the shepherd bitch reacts to. It's the scent of Curly's wife that she reacts to, and she jumps in among the puppies. And I wonder if it's because there's a threat there and she's protective of her young, trying to protect them. And you could draw some sort of comparisons there between the way that George treats Lenny, the way that Candy treats his dog, and now the way that this mother dog treats her puppies. There's running through the whole novel a sense of kind of parenthood and care for a dependent other. So sort of worth dwelling on a few of the things in this extract as well. Hopefully that was useful.